Let's get started. Yep.
Well, hello, everyone. My name is Denis Grenier, and I live in Dover. And I was thinking that during COVID time that maybe someone would like to learn about doing their research. It's something you can do at home. It's a lot of fun. I have a warning at the very beginning, and that is it can be very addictive. So I hope that my area of concentration is in the French Canadian end of things, but it doesn't mean that you can't use this information for your research, that you, if you're from a different country or a different area. I did kind of hit a gold mine, and my advice, I'm going to give you a little bit of tidbit of background and information and stuff. Behind me, you can see it a little. I do have it on the PowerPoint. It's my prop. I encourage everyone to think big if they undertake doing their research. And this I did. This is a 10-generation chart behind me that's about 99.9% complete. And I'll tell you a little bit more information during the PowerPoint. Can't see it very well on there, but it's there.
Might be able to
Hold it up a little bit more. I don't know if people can kind of see it. We're gonna see it. You can kind of see
And
it.
I have it on the PowerPoint as well.
Okay, good. We don't have very good lighting here.
It's a lot of writing. But I encourage people to go big. A lot of people think that they've done their family tree when they may have completed one line or two. You'll see, hopefully after this is over, but it's quite intense and very involved and a lot of fun. How did I start? I'll start from the beginning. I was 17 years old, and I was visiting my brother, who was training in Lewiston, Maine. And I walked in the library because I was bored at my brother's. And I saw a small room, not very big, and it was the genealogy room. And in it was a volume of books. And I have that on my PowerPoint, which I'll click on here in a minute. And I found my uncle in there, and my uncle and my aunt when they got married. It's all based on marriage, and I'll go give you a little bit more information as to how that works when you're researching. A lot of people think you need the birth certificates and all that stuff. You're not going to find a birth certificate during a certain era, so you'll be wasting a lot of time. I'm hoping to be able to tell you how to avoid roadblocks where you think you're stuck and you're not getting anywhere. So I'm hoping to be able to share some information with that. But before you get started, the answer is the trick of the trade, I guess, is to set up a room in your house. I commandeered my oldest daughter's bedroom, so she couldn't come back home. And I made tables in that room, and I set up all my material. And the reason I did that was so I could spend a couple hours and then leave the room and then come back the next morning or the next whenever time I had, and then start and continue where I left off. You'll find after some very brief period of delving into this research that it takes a lot of time to set up, and then you have to put it away. Is kind of it's not very encouraging. So it's a lot more fun to just keep it all out. So get a room, and then I said earlier, think big. Get yourself. You can get these online. A 10-generation chart, and the whole idea is that you can get a pencil. I filled this chart behind me, I want to say 4 times at least, and towards the end I ended up getting an erasable pen for the last one. This is the last one that I have behind me. And what's fun about it is you can see the holes and you want to fill them. And so, and I will give you different ideas on how to do your research. I did hit what I think is a pretty good source but on the French Canadian end of things. And at the end of the when you're doing your research, you hear a lot of little stories, and that's a lot of fun to navigate through. The other thing I want to point out is make sure while they're elderly members of the family, interview them, talk to them, ask them questions about if they knew who grandpa was or grandma or great-grandma and so forth. I did that on several occasions, and one of them was he passed away a couple of years ago, but he was the inspiration for doing all this. That's the same uncle I found in that first volume that I looked at. And interview them, and I actually filmed it, so I have it still on recording. The other thing you want to look for is if there were family reunions. Sometimes it's brochures with pictures. Get your hands on those. Those are really valuable, and I'll show you some that I did get my hands on. So don't hesitate to do that. Now, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the set of books. And what happened was, I was so intrigued by the books that I wrote, this is now, I was 17, I'm not going to go into details of how old I am, but put it this way, there were no computers back then. And so I wrote a letter to the author, the person who wrote this, a priest in some parish in Canada. And I wrote a letter and asked him if he sold his books. And he wrote back, and it was all handwritten notes. No, I didn't even think I owned a typewriter then. And he wrote back and he said yes, and they were $5 a piece. So I bought all 11 of them. And what you'll find is and I'll show you, I'll get the PowerPoint started here so I can show you what the cover looks like in the books. Now, Amy tells me that she did locate these books at the Concord Library. And so if that's of help, if not, then, I can certainly, you can touch base with me at some point and I can make mine available or help you start your process. Let me see here. Sign on the PowerPoint. Is it down here?
Share screen. So just for everyone's sake, just because I forgot to mention in the beginning, we cannot see or hear you. This is a one-way webinar, so you can only see Dennis, and that's it. But if you have questions during his presentation, feel free. There's a little chat box. Feel free to put any questions you have in that chat box. And as Dennis is doing the presentation, I will make sure to ask your questions. And he will answer them. So I do have one question for you, Dennis, that someone was asking. They noticed your ring, and they were asking, is your ring a family crescent?
No, sorry. No, it's just a ring that my wife bought me. I'm sure they do have a lot of family crescents. You got to be careful on those things because it's very commercialized and so on. I would have to do a lot of research before I was convinced that it's my side of the family is Grenier, and my paternal was Grenier, and maternal was Gilbert. Now, this book here, I'm going to try to stretch it.
There you go.
All right. Oops. I'm going to get to that slide.
Can you zoom in a bit if you?
No, that's not the one.
Oh, that's not the one you want? Okay.
I want the book.
Let's go.
No,
That one? Okay.
Is it the arrow? No.
Yes, yeah.
So that's the book, and let me stretch it so you can see it. Okay. It covers 3 counties right there. Bose County, Dorchester, and Frontenac. And from the years of 1625 to 1946. And the reason I mention that is because if you were doing research and you couldn't find someone in there or the information seemed to be missing, it's because they were either not married. This is all based on marriages, and I'll show you here what the next, how that worked. And I've owned these books for quite a few years, so I know how to navigate through them. But there's other avenues to find the other information. So I just want to not have you, all right, which arrow did we hit?
You're gonna hit the next.
Oh.
Oh. I might have to click on this because you zoomed in. Because you zoomed in that it got all funky. There you go.
Yeah. So you do the arrow, okay. Now, this is the page. And if you see right there, I hope you can see it, it says Bertrand, and the last name is all Grenier up top. As you can see, it's Grenier. Okay. Now, this number is important, 219. You'll see when I research the others later. I'm just doing Bertrand for now. That's the one that inspired me to start this. Oh, by the way, these 11 books, I was able to populate my 10 generation chart, about 2/3 of it, just using these books. The point of the matter is that during that era, or those days, whatever, people lived and got married in the same community as a rule. And it could be 3 or 4 generations, and then they would jump to a different community. So in this case here, now I know Bertrand was my uncle, so my father would not be showing up on there because he was married in Ontario, and his their older brother would not be on there because he got married in Quebec City. But just give you an idea, don't be stuck with a stumbling block on that. Now, I'm going to share more information here on the next one. Okay. What I decided to do the research on is on the Gilbert side. If all goes well and I have time on my plate, I'm going to share a story about the Gilbert side, and I have a bunch of stories, and those are just as much fun. Why can't I? Oops, there you go. Gilbert, right there. Yeah. Well, all right. Edouard, that's the French version, Gilbert. As you can see, he's 218. Make sure I get the right one. All right, 218 is an important number right there. These would be his, starting with Delia all the way to Henry. Those are brothers and sisters. Again, if you're doing research, the further back you go, the more accurate the information is likely to be in there because, like I said, they would have all been married in the same. But you can tell right there, Edward married. In Canada, it's the reverse. So it's October 5th, 1927. And he married Marianne Boulanger. A little tidbit of information on a lot of Catholic families. The female all began with Mary, and the males all began with Joseph, oftentimes. For example, in my baptism initially, it was said Joseph Dennis Michael Grenier. But over the years, you removed the Joseph. But anyway, in her case, her name is Marianne Boulanger. You're going to see a lot of Marianne, or Mary hyphenated Boulanger. They were married in St. Gideon, which is obviously in one of those 3 counties that I mentioned earlier. And then you see the others. So if, like Delia, you can see the year and date that she was married. And so forth. Now, I said to pay attention to 218, so we're going to go to 218 on this side. So I save time by going to the next there, 218 this side. All right. I'll bring it up again. I guess I can't bring it up, can I? Anyway,
Are you,
I'm trying to bring it up and stretch it, but it won't let me.
I don't,
Oh,
there you go.
there we go. Well, it's
Oh,
there.
I think you have to zoom in first and then you can move it up.
Oh.
There you go.
Gene, there's your number. There's your 218. His Edouard's father was Jean Gilbert, and he was married on 6/15. So that's June 15, 1891. He married Marie Doyon at Saint Francois, which is a different town, but in the same county as the books are reflecting. And then again, you can see when you see his brother right there, Napoleon, the little colons or whatever these are, or hyphens or whatever, that means he got married twice. So right below him would be his second wife, and when he married her. Now we're back to the number again. So the top number is 101. So you go to 101 on this side, and that should be on my next screen.
And then go to the next.
That's 101. That's it right there. Okay. There's 101. I hope you can see this. There's 101 on the right. And then it would be Jean Senior. And he was married, he married Apolline Lessard on November 16, 1858. And you can see this one here. I don't have the rest of them, but because this is only for following the Gilbert. But you can see this person got married at least twice, maybe even 3 times. And you can see all his brothers and sisters. Further back you go, the more you're likely to find more accurate information. That's because, like I said earlier, they all lived in the same place. Okay. And that's the next one. Oh, how did I get to that many? All right. There, no. All right. The next one is Olivier, and he was married on January 13, 1824 to Marianne Rodrigue in St. Francis. Quite a few from St. Francis. I believe I counted so like 6th generation, up to 6th generation in the same town. All right, now we're going to go to other PowerPoints because they're fun. Other sites, and we're looking for 12, almost at the end of the search of this one, of this branch, this line. Just moving the thing on me.
Oh, are you trying to just,
I'm trying to get to the next page.
there you go.
All right. That's this one right here, Charles. He is the father of Olivier, and again, same thing, brothers and sisters, and Charles happened to be the oldest. Now I'm gonna look for number 5 on this side.
Trying to go to the next page. You have to zoom in first and then go. Okay.
All right, well now we're at the tail end, you'll see it here. So 5 is right there. Another Charles, and for some reason it's Charles J, and that's his brothers and sisters. Then you go to 3, his father was Gilbert, and then you go to 2, and there's Gilbert Sr. And then it talks in there about a little story of the first one who came to the New World. And it was, this guy was Charles and Jean Dupree was their last name. So Charles Gilbert and Jean Dupree. Their last name was Dupree. And hopefully I'll have time to be able to tell you what the gist of that story is. It's kind of fun. And you'll learn these stories, and it's kind of fun. It adds to the enthusiasm of the research. Okay, now, so that's the Gilbert family, and all of this is in one book. I have 11 books, so that's only one line, and that's my maternal side. And let me go to the next slide.
Now go. Oh, other way. Yeah.
Okay. I did do, unfortunately, I did to show you, this is the 10 generation chart, and I can get my mouse to stroll on here. I can show you. And my mouse isn't strolling on
Oh, because I think it's in PowerPoint mode.
Oh,
yeah.
Well, can you see from my finger now?
No. Is it something down here?
Yeah.
Okay.
On this, you got the Greniers on the left and the Gilbert on the right. The very bottom of the line, the very bottom of it, where it says genealogy straight across, that is the Grenier line. On the mother side, it's right in the center, that line that goes right through the center. That's where that one begins. The rest of them are all different lines, and I'm going to show you basically what happens is, obviously, my grandparents, she had parents, so that's another line. And then when they got married to someone, there was another line. It is not uncommon to have one overlap into the other. So it's because about 45% of the original French colonists in Canada were ancestors. When you're looking at this chart, it is, give you an idea, there are 1,024 names on it. You can see a very minor gap on the Grenier, 3/4 of the way up, and I can tell you an idea, if I have the time, what I believe happened there. And then the very last one, where it says the very last generation, the 11th generation, I did a search of every single last name. And I ended up with about 50 to 60 hits. And what happened was, and what I mean by that is someone else, maybe a genealogist or someone else, had done research on that same line and come up with some interesting story, interesting information. A lot of it was verifiable. So I'll give you an idea what happened on one of them. These lines don't end at 10 generation. I have one line that goes to year 1150 and another one that goes to year 1350, around that period. And the majority of them go between the early 1500s to mid 1600s. So most of these lines, they just keep going in the site. Let me go to the next screen because I want to.
So I do have someone that's asking if you can find similar books for like other provinces in Canada, like for example, New Brunswick.
Well, I don't believe so, but I can tell you what you can do, because that's another thing that's coming up shortly. Hopefully I'll have time to do that, but it's a different search. What I tried to do is to vary my research. I found these books to be very accurate. There was one basic mistake. Someone was a sister versus a mother or something like that, but that was about it. Now, this is another tool of information that's available. Now, I said earlier that you're not going to find birth certificates because they didn't exist. I'm going to segue here for a minute and
So example, what you're talking about next would be good for someone that, for example, is looking for people in New Brunswick. They might be
Now-
able to find something similar to this.
I would, it's a search.
Okay.
It's an online search, not necessarily books. I have not run across any other books other than this one. But what I'm emphasizing is that it's important to count on different research. I see a lot of, I had 3 sites that I was using. I was using the books. I was using a genealogy search online, which I hope to be able to go and show you what's available there in a minute. And then I also use Family Search, which is a Mormon, is that a Mormon site? What is Family Search is the same as, yeah. And a lot of information, sometimes you gotta be careful because they will put in there, they'll say something about that this person had, 15 kids when in fact they only had 5, that type of thing, or their site is not very reliable. So you got to be careful on that. I do a lot of comparison. I mean, here's a good avenue to compare it. I wish I could see the number on this line. But okay, this here is an official. It's in a registry. It's 1934. That would be, in today's term, would be a death certificate. And that's the only way it was recorded. And it's all handwritten, and it's handwritten by usually a priest. And this was my great-grandfather, and it's in French, but he died at the age of 79. The story on him, and it's got good information because it tells you what date, it actually tells you the date that he passed away. What's interesting about that one is I couldn't for the life of me find, because I went to the town where they were all buried and I looked at cemeteries, and I couldn't find his anywhere. And then one day I did show up at the library version in St. George, which is just outside of, just in Quebec. And the person told me that, well, we find out that he had dementia. And in those days, they didn't know how to handle people with dementia. They didn't even have a diagnosis for it. So they put that he was in a hospital. And when he died, he was actually buried at the hospital. So there's a cemetery at the hospital. Tidbits on cemetery, I just think about it now, is that when I did go to Europe. I hope to share that with you too if I can. And went to France. And you'll find you probably waste a lot of your time going to cemeteries, and there's 2 things. One is most cemeteries the tombstones were made of wood. So if a fire hit the area, then the cemetery was gone. That's one problem. And we're talking now, 15, 1600 and so forth. Another thing I found is that the weather has hit the stones so hard you cannot read anything. I had this vision that I would go to a cemetery and take a piece of paper and a pencil and write down, scroll the information from way back when, but could not do it. So that's, but this is an example of how a death would be recorded. Very similar on birth certificates. It would be a log like this, and it would show up as a recording. Marriages. Now that we're on that subject, I want to share with you an interesting tidbit of information. So we can, you got to understand the Catholic Church had quite an influence over the French colonies, and that back then the French colonies were Quebec, Montreal, and Acadia, which we know today as Nova Scotia. Those were the only 3 colonies. And the reason France did not have many colonies because their emphasis was on making money, and it was on fur trade and so forth. While the US colonies were more into developing and making money, but also colonizing. So, but Canada only had 3 colonies. And the same time that the US would have been what? The English would have had 13 copies. Let's just give you an example of. Now, the French in 1610, that gives you a pretty good perspective on things. The French king was Henry the Fourth. He was assassinated, and his son took over as Louis the 13th. Now, Louis the 13th was 8 years old, so he couldn't run a kingdom, if you want to call it that. So he entrusted all of his duties and everything else to Cardinal Richelieu. I'm sure you've heard of, you may have, if you're from the French history, you would have heard about Cardinal Richelieu. So the Catholic Church had a pretty heavy hand in the French colonies and how it was run and so forth for quite a few years, because it takes a few years for the 8-year-old to get his wings out. So important ordinances, and this is important because in 1539, this was under, there was an ordinance passed, and it was required all priests to keep records of baptism. That's when it first started. And then in 1579, the ordinance was extended to include marriages and burials. And this is the extent of what you're seeing right there, is what was required by the church. And then in 1667, they amended it for the last time, I think, to require that registries be kept in duplicates at the parish and at the city hall. And the reason for that is if the church burned down or the parish burned down, then you would have another record somewhere else. And then at some point, they also sent a third copy to Rome, or where the Catholic Church was located. So that's just given. The reason I point this out is because that's why I say a lot of it is based on marriages, no certificates. And the reason why I can go so far with the information is because of these three ordinances. Okay, another good source to look at, and this is the same person now. This is a census. Oh my goodness. Census, where am I? Right there. Census information, and I'm going to find the person that I'm looking for. He is right there. Boy, it's not going up anymore. Anyway, he's on the second page, right there, Charles. And it tells you during the census at that time, it would say, let's see, he was, looks like 36 years old, male. He was a farmer. His wife was Georgiano, and they don't say, obviously they say she's a Grenier, so she was 34. They had 1, 2, 3, 4 children. This one here is this is my great-grandfather, the one that passed away in the hospital. This is Albert. He was 8 years old. That would be my grandfather. And this census was taken in 1891. So that's good information because it also tells you their age, so you can compare and that's usually they get scared when people come over to a census, so they tell the truth. So you know it's a pretty truthful information. And they would do the census. In Canada, I don't know. I thought it was more often than that, but it's a pretty old one, 1891. So the census is one good information you can. Okay, this is another one, and this is an example of an individual site. So this is an individual, probably pretty close to being a true genealogist. And he called it fish individual, so that's a file from an individual. And he has the same information on there. A little bit of discrepancies on age, but it's pretty reliable. That was good. That was a really good thing. Then, okay. All right. I said earlier about getting your hands on things, get your hands on any family reunion and so forth. I did get my hands on this one here. This is a 300-year anniversary for the Lefebvre. When they say de Boulanger, that means that they shared the name change along the way. Lefebvre and Boulanger. And that would be my grandmother on my mother's side, my maternal grandmother's side of the family. And what's important about that book, it was done, the reunion took place in Lac-Mégantic on July 4th, 1976. And it has multiple pictures in there of my ancestors. What I found interesting is I found photos of 6 generations back, and to a point where it's not very, the cameras were relatively new and so forth. So as you can imagine, this is in the early 1800s. So there's a lot of nice photos in there, and I did get this. This came from my uncle or my mother's brother, and he's since passed away, so I've inherited. Okay, this book is written about the first Charles Garner. You can get your hands on this. I got them through family and some of them I purchased and so forth. That's a book written by the first Charles, my first ancestor on my father's side. You'll notice the name change from Garnier to Grenier. And that book was written in the 1950s. And what he did, this was a Grenier that wrote this book. And he went to France. The first one came from Tonobu, France. And it's a farming town in just shy of Normandy. And it's in Normandy, province of Normandy, but where the Normandy invasion took place, for example, it's about 60 miles south of there. The book has some interesting, and I'll cover some of that here. Okay, I might as well get into my trip to France as we speak, because while I've got the slideshow in here now. This is my trip to Tonobu, France. I went there in 2012. This picture, which is not very good, on the left, on my left, is the car. I stayed at a bed and breakfast in Falaise. Falaise, because Tonobu does not have, all it has is a church as a center of town. And I did research, and I did go to Falaise. Now, and she makes an attempt, and finally I said, "Do you speak English?" "Oh yes." Well, they were British. They had bought a bed and breakfast in France. But so the next morning I go to have my breakfast, and there's a young couple sitting at this table with me, and they had young children, and I speak French to them. I told them what I was doing, and I was visiting, and the young man said, "You've got to meet my mother." I said, "Oh, okay, well, that's interesting." So his mother comes down for breakfast a few minutes later, and she sits across from me, and he introduces me to her, and I start talking to her, and she starts talking to me. Mind you now, she lives in that area, and it's exact same French that I spoke for years. So keep in mind that the French dialect that we speak in Quebec is still used in France in the same area that I was doing my research in. So I found that fascinating, but Now, moving on to you can see where it says, well, that's the speed limit, 45, that's in kilometers. The towns are very quaint, and the houses are very quaint. You can see that picture there. And what you're seeing in that first picture where it says 45, that's the church, the town church, the center. There's a better picture of the church. The lady on the left, I looked all over, and I show up in France, in Tonobu, on a Wednesday at noontime. I'm like, oh my God, I didn't plan that right. It's a farm community, so everybody's out on the fields and working in the fields or whatever they're doing. And I finally asked questions. I would find someone who would drive by, and I would, follow them to their house or something, and then I would ask them questions. So finally I met this lady. She is the town secretary. And I told her what I was doing, and this was all in French, mind you. She, in her hand, you can't see it, but there's a 7-inch key. She hands me the key to the town treasurer, which is the church, because she couldn't leave because her husband was coming home from the field and they were going to have lunch or something. So she entrusts me with the keys, and I was just flabbergasted. One other thing I want to point out, see these old tombstones? Those are the ones I was telling you about earlier. I could not read anything, and I know that the original Greniers or Garners would be buried there, but this church was built in the late 1100s, early 1200. This is the inside of the church. I took 2 pictures. I walked in and I was just like stunned that she would trust me with this, so I felt I was almost in a panic. You can see at the very front, and years ago when the church, prior to Vatican I, the altar was at the very end. That's why you'll see a lot of churches with 2 altars. The one that's like a table in the front, and then there's one that's, because in those days they used to face the front. The priest would face the front, so that all you saw when you were a parishioner is the back of the priest doing the mass. But anyway, so they built the new altar. I took 2 pictures. That's the original floor, and there's a lot of original woodwork. You can see at the let's see if I can zoom that in. See that beautiful woodwork on that one there at the both ends. And they only use the church now for marriages, and they do it once a year. They'll do a mass in there and so forth. So, okay, now I spent quite a few hours doing this research, and eventually I decided to capture the history. And what I did was I tied this. I took the information that I was getting from all the various searchers, and I could feel like the family, how they lived, and what they did for work and so forth. And before I go any further with this book, I want to get to the site. So now you're going to have to help me get out of the PowerPoint. Go back. Yeah. Sure, okay. Now, one thing I want to, all right, someone asked earlier about if New Brunswick has a book. This particular site right here, it's loaded with ads now, but it's one that I relied on to help me populate the rest of my book. It is, you have a choice when you sign on to either do it in French or English. It's basically the province took all the information that the book came from marriages and so forth, and turn it into a site. Now, avoid all of these other things here. I just click on here, and I'm going to kind of show you. Let's go to, this is my uncle again. That's the one that, now we're going to do the, all right. Where did it show up? Good work.
Oh, is his first name Grenier?
Yes.
Oh, it is. Okay.
No.
Okay, I think it's backwards.
Okay. I thought I did.
Okay.
But anyway, let's go Bertram. Was it?
You might have to type it in because I think it's doing it backwards.
And I know the spouse is not Grenier. We'll leave the spouse out of it. There you go. Let's see what happens.
Well, I think the name thing should be the last name because it's saying his first name's Grenier.
Again?
Yeah, so you have to get rid of the first name.
My practice earlier was not that.
Don't do the automatic thing. Just skip to the next box.
Skip
Yeah.
to the next box
Great.
and do Bertrand.
Yeah.
All right, good. Now, there's my uncle, the one I showed you in the book. He married Marie-Ange Morin. I'm going to click on him. And I'm just going to close this. All right. In fact, you can put pictures in there. I'm not even sure who put that one in, but that's him. His parents are right here. Albert, and that's his mother. And then his wife, her name was Marianne Morin. Her father was Jean. So that's how you can see it in the blue here. But I'm going to continue with the Greniers. I'm going to go a couple generations so I can give you a little bit more information as to. All right, Charles. That's not bad, I guess. All right, here's what happened. Albert, which is my grandfather, he married at the age of 23. He married Mary Ann at the age of 20. She was 20. On that date, February 15th, 1915, in St. Cone, very similar to the books I was showing you earlier, except this is all automated. Now, some of them early on in, the information is not terribly accurate, because I know that Albert had 3 children. There's Bertrand. He also had my father and their older brother. So some of it you have to work around. Now we're going to go on to the father, Charles's father. His name was Hector. Now I want to do a little bit more information on this one because this is interesting. Hector, and he married Marianne Gagnon, and Charles was married to Georgiana Poulet. Right there. There's Charles. There's Georgiana Poulet. And again, they only have 1 child, and that's not 100% accurate. So you got to go further back to get more where it's more accurate. Hector, there you go. So, all right. Here's what's interesting about Hector. You'll see right there, Sean, he got married. He married Marie Gagnon at the age of 21. She was 19 in 1849 in St. George, Gabos, which is a town I was telling you about earlier. He was a farmer, so to tell you the information. When he was born, the town that he was born in, St. Francis, country of Canada. When he died at 69. Where he died and where he was buried, and there's the registry, the date that he was buried in. And the same with her, I will tell you. Now, when you scroll down, these are the children that they had. And the reason I was saying this is interesting because when you go to, he married again because his first wife passed away. So when you go down to Marie Bisson, the second wife, and you go to the children, you can see a few more children, but you're going to see that their last name bears their father's last name. And there's what's his name, Charles or Hector? That was Hector. Hector's children were still there. So we're going to go to Joseph. And again, this is some information that I would try if I couldn't find a book. I would try this, but also get your hands on the census and the information that you can get to collaborate what you have. And oftentimes you can get copies, like I did.
One of our attendees, Rob, actually mentioned that you can access these books through Ancestry. And the library does have an Ancestry subscription. And we did find out that usually you have to be in library to use our Ancestry subscription, but they have extended it so that you can use it from home until the end of the year. So if you want to do some research and use those books, you can. Rob is also saying a good source for understanding New Brunswick genealogy is the Genealogist Handbook for Atlantic Canada Research. So thank you for those tips, Rob.
Okay, good information. This one here, I want to point out when you're looking at this, you say, wow, you notice down here, these are, they're called bachelors, or they were spinsters, or they weren't married, it didn't, you know. But you'll notice this Joseph and this Joseph again. Well, the first Joseph only lived a few months. So they turned around and had another child, and that one lived a few months too. So they had so they tried Joseph again is what happened on that one. But there was a lot of children here. And there's Hector, the one that I was telling you about. We moved on to the other parent. So this site is pretty handy, Pierre, and we're now in 1781. Charles, yeah. So Charles is also, he was married to Mary Chardiff. Anyway, Pierre, 1736. He got married at 35, and she was 25. And I'm going to move to the next one, Charles. Again, there's Joseph. So what you can see up here, we're up to 1636. All right, let me go to this one. I'm going to tell you a little story on that one. This is the first one that book I was showing you about that was written, that my trip to Tonobu, that's the first one. Look at the age. I'm not sure how reasonably accurate this is, but he was 28 and they're saying she was 12. Well, the information I had is she was a little older than that. And what happened in those days is you would make an announcement that you plan on getting married, and it had to be accepted in the church, and they had to be re-announced for a whole year. So you had to be engaged for the sake of discussion for about a year until the parish or the congregation would allow you to get married. My understanding was the announcement was made at 15. Like I said, some of this is, I can't imagine a 28-year-old marrying yet a 12-year-old, but she was young. And they had 12 children together. Originally, when I used the site, some people can go in and change the information because there's not 12 children there. So someone moved things around. I do know from my other site that other information that they had 12 children. She died, she predeceased him. He was 81, which is doing very well in the early 1700s. And he was a single child to these two people here, Guillaume Garnier and Françoise Deschalets. And now his wife, that goes further. When you see a blue there, that means they can even go further than 17. So Louis, just for the fun of it, I'll just click on that one. That goes to his parents. See, okay, 1611, they say about 1611. and she was married to, and there's her parents, which is even further back. But if you recall the dates I gave you earlier, that's well beyond that time period in question. Okay, now, so that's the site we can use, and the person who provided additional information is good for New Brunswick. This book does cover part of Nova Scotia, and I do have some lines that did go, lineage that did go to Nova Scotia. Now I am going to go to this guy right here. All right. This is another program that I bought. It's called Family Tree Maker,
Oh,
and I
yeah,
just
here.
updated that.
Where?
Oh, you can't see it?
No, we have to share a new screen.
Oh.
This one?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, now you see it? Good.
Yes.
What's good about this program is that you can keep track of it. Now, this particular, when I converted back to, when I added to the most recent one, which is year 2019, I had difficulties, but it did bring back most of the files. But there's this particular one, which is one of the few that I could open, only has 6,000 entries, 6,289 entries. And you can, again, you input the data, and if you have photos, you can add them. And I have lots of photos I could add. This thing needs to be updated from my end. This is my own. So if you came over, I could research from my files if there's any connections to that 10 generation chart that I have in the back. And I put dates, and I have a lot more information on there than probably is available in the books. You can put children, you can print, you can share this with others. So you can actually add notes. Those birth certificates I showed you, you can add those on there. So it's a pretty good program to have, and it helps you keep track of your own information, because you can get totally lost and then you say, I know I saw it somewhere, but I can't remember. So because of the different sites you have. So now I am going to, so that's the site, and then again, that's the same as what I just showed you earlier. Let's see if I can go to the next one. Yep. There's Charles, and you can keep going, and then you can add, as you see, I've added a lot of information in there. And the years. And then you can see that it goes well beyond this, 1610 to 1678, 1588. So that it does go back, a lot of fun. Let me see here. Now I am going to share a couple stories. Go back to the PowerPoint.
Yep,
I guess
keep
we're gonna
it.
click up here, right?
You have to hit stop share.
Stop share, go back down there. I'm gonna go back to the PowerPoint. In the book, I describe things like, if you go to Quebec today, and you see monuments, right, in Quebec City of various original colonists and so forth, they're likely related to my ancestry. About 45, real close to 50% of the original colonists were ancestors in some sense. One of the fun things I discovered when I did that search of the last name is I also discovered that Celine Dion's mother was French Canadian, and I have a line that I share with her. And also, are you ready for this? Madonna. Madonna's mother was French Canadian, and I don't know if a lot of people knew that, but I have a line that shares with her. the one line I was telling you about earlier that went to 1150 was research that I found that the original, now during 1150 there were no king of France, it was tribes, and there were tribe leaders. And this particular person had purchased the land, donated the land, and the funds needed to begin what's called today's version of the Trappist monks. And he, so his ancestors is connected to my mother's side way back. My mother, now you'll notice in the book, I say the Grenier, parentheses, Garner family, and Gilbert Dupree family. And the reason why I use the Gilbert line to kind of show you the research, and you'll notice that I don't know if you remember, but at the very end, where there was a little paragraph describing what the origin was, who it was, and so forth, was Jean and Charles Gilbert. Those were two brothers. I'm going to leave the Charles out. His name was Gilbert. And they were brothers in France during the late 16, early 1700s. And back then, the king had a tax on salt, and it was between provinces. It wasn't just like a duty that you would collect if it came from another country. It was a tax that was assessed between provinces. Now, if you were a province that was friendly to the king, your tax were lower. And if you were from a province that you weren't so friendly to the king, your taxes were higher for salt, and salt being a major commodity. So what happened was the two brothers decided to get some salt from the less expensive place and bring it to the more expensive provinces. In essence, they were smuggling internally, they were smuggling salt. Well, ultimately they were arrested and they got caught, I don't know, a couple times, and finally the king says, all right, I've had enough of these, they call them salt smugglers. And so he shipped them to the New World, to his colonies to work. And what he did is and this is all documented by a priest that traveled with them. Keep in mind that the travel from France on a ship during that era took 60 days at minimum, and sometimes more or whatever. And so what they did is they ended up being boarded with the animals, because they were prisoners being sent to the New World. And they landed in Quebec, and they ended up at the Quebec hospital for about a month or two each. And then they were assigned to a seigneur, which is a land baron or landowner. He owned the king would give him land to distribute, and then these people would have to work the land. So you follow the river, Rivière Chaudière, for example, that goes from the St. Lawrence almost to Jackman or Lac Méganic. And you follow that river, and that was your route, and you were given a parcel of land that was anywhere from 3 telephone poles wide, so let's say 1,000 feet maybe, or 750 feet, by a mile wide, and then you just built your own house. And the story with them is that they didn't want to share their last name because the people in the community knew that there were prisoners named Duprees that had come to the New World, to Canada. So when they asked his name, he just said Gilbert. And so hence, that's what adopted his first name became his last name. And that's how the Gilbert family all began. It's kind of fun. And the priest who wrote it, keep in mind back then, only the priests and a few people with a lot of money could read and write. And the first Charles did in fact read and write, and he was in today's version, he would be like a realtor. He owned a lot of land and he sold it, and you'd see a lot of documentation with his name affixed to it. So what I'm going to do now is just kind of brush up on things. I have, let's see if I have any more of the slides on there. Oops. Is that the last one? No.
I think that might be the last one. Someone has asked me if you could share your slides.
My slides?
Your slides.
The slides,
Your presentation, sure.
Yeah, you
Okay.
mean the PowerPoint, yeah?
Yeah. So what we're planning on doing after this is done is I will send out an email to all the participants with resources that Dennis used in his research and information about, I can even include Rob's mention of where to look for information and just the websites and all the information that we talked to today. I'll send it out in an email so you don't have to worry about scrambling to write things down, and you'll have it all at your fingertips, and I'll include Dennis's slides in there.
Yeah, and I don't know, like phone, do they want like my email address?
Yeah.
Because I'm more than willing to go to someone's house and help them
Yeah.
out,
Okay.
start their own, to get them started. I could even bring my books, they're not very big. Bring those along, and I can bring my program and research it from there. And see
Very generous of you.
if that's something that they want to
Yeah.
do. I think once you get into it, you can really, and the book is available, and I'm not trying to sell it or anything, but it's just shy of 400 pages, and a lot of the information I just told you about is in there. I did do the DNA. The only problem I had with the DNA was, and I think I know the reason why, but it did cover that, it did say that I was 100% French, more or less, but it doesn't separate it by French. It separates, for those of you who have done it, it separates it by region in Europe. Interesting thing is I know through my research that there was some native marriages in there, and what I want to point out on the Indian marriages and so forth, if you married you're a male and you're marrying a young lady from the tribe, we'll say from the Huron Indians, and you moved in with the tribe, the church no longer kept a record or anything about you. So that's one reason why you may have a total blank. It's very unlikely to have any information on it. On the other hand, if the young lady or the young man that you married came to the town, then you became part of the record. The king was so anxious to send women to be married in the New World that he would send them on ships with dowry, big chests full of silverware and things for the table, and then you could actually go to the dock and almost pick a wife, and then so that was common. Some of the people who were married ended up that's how they got their animals, because the young lady's side of the family would give so many cows and so many horses or whatever for them to marry there. And that's how you started your farm, and you built your own land. You helped each other out. These people might have, your neighbor might be a good carpenter. The other neighbor may be a good farmer. So they would share each other's tools and knowledge in order to survive, because you had to work from the land, and initially you had to build your own farm and your own house, and then you had to clear the fields and so that you could have gardening and so forth. So I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I think I've covered just about everything I had brought today.
Well, I guess now is if anyone has any questions and they want to type them into the chat box, and Dennis can try to answer them for you if you have any questions about how to do your own research, how to start it. Patrick asked, you were able to use the books and website to gather most of or all of this information. Did you use any of the genealogy services as well to fill in gaps or obtain larger amounts of data? Like, did you buy like a subscription to like Ancestry or?
I did not, because I found Ancestry, when I was using it, it's a lot of information that people give to it, and it's not 100% accurate, is what I found. What's good about Ancestry and so forth is the more up to date, like during the 20th century information, where you may have more documents available to you. I didn't find much luck in finding documents on Ancestry. I signed on a few times and I wasn't able to do it. I did, just to let you know, if you ever decide to hire someone, I was going to hire a genealogist to fill in the last gaps. And when I realized that they charge more than attorneys do, I said, no, I will pay for my own trip and go to France again. And by the way, when I was in France, I had a few hours, so I went and found where they kept their records. And I did go and research in their version of their genealogy section of their records kept. And I'm sitting there and I spent about an hour just to learn their computer, how it worked. And then I finally got delved into it, and I find the information was microfilmed by the Church of the Mormons in Utah.
Oh, I think you froze for a second. You're frozen on mine. I don't know if anyone else has you frozen.
There should be more information than that.
Okay. Well, oh, I don't know what happened. Is everyone seeing on my computer? It shows Dennis being frozen. Is he fine on everyone else's, or is it just on mine? Just want to make sure he's actually, we can see him. Uh-oh. I think we lost you. Oh, you know what? Here, we're gonna just close this down and we're gonna switch over to this one.
Oh, dear.
I think we just lost you. Sorry, guys. Hold on. Technical
there I am.
difficulties.
That's much better too. You can see my chart behind there.
Yeah.
So, oh, good.
Okay. So what else? Hold on a second. I'm gonna read this chat from here. Oh my gosh. I'm sorry. This computer is giving me such issues today. Apparently, every time you do your 2-finger scroll, it locks the computer up. So let's see. Rob would like to know, are you reasonably fluent in French, or were you able to do this research only knowing how to read English?
No, my first language was French. You probably can tell a little. I can read and write limited writing. I can read it reasonably well, and I can obviously speak it. So that's it. Yeah, I'm reasonably fluent in French.
Google Translate is amazing if you need to translate stuff. So do not let the language barrier hurt you. Kathleen said that she used the American Canadian Society Library in Manchester to help her get started. So thanks for that suggestion. Okay. Hopefully we're back up and running. Okay. And I'm going to do a little plug for the library, because we do, if anyone wants to do research online, we do have 2 really great databases. So I know Dennis said you didn't really use Ancestry, but Ancestry can be great if you need to look up like census records, or it does have like vital statistics and stuff. So if you need that type of stuff, we do have Ancestry at the library. And again, they are allowing you to access it from home up until the end of this month. this month, this year. And we also have one called Heritage Quest, which is again really, really great for if you want to do census records. It also has books about family histories and genealogies. So those are two really, really great resources to use, and any of your librarians can kind of help you get started with those if you need the help. In the meantime, does anyone else have any questions? I think we are back. We're back online, so you're not frozen anymore.
Oh, good. So, there was
It says, "Is Madonna's mom a Fortin?"
hold it. I have it written here. Good question. I did write it here somewhere. Hold on. Stories to share bed and breakfast St. Charles. Oh. Someone is sending me texts. I want to say yes. Thought I wrote it down somewhere, but it was just a quick story to share. And then, of course, he was Italian. I don't see it what I wrote down. Oh, by the way, there was another little tidbit of information I want to share. There was a Saint Charles Garner. He was actually a Jesuit priest who became beatified because of his. He was, that's another story in itself, and it is in my book. Sharing the same name as the first Grenier, Charles Garner. His name was Charles Garner. In that, one of the books I read is that he wrote a lot of letters to his relatives, and it was in that same town where I stayed at that bed and breakfast I showed you. So the indications are it's not direct, but that he was related. He might have been like a nephew to my first ancestor because he was younger, or my ancestor might have been a nephew to him, or something of that nature. He was giving last rites to a Huron in a tent, in a teepee or whatever they call them, of Huron Indian, and they were in battle with the Iroquois, and they saw him in there, so they took care of him too. It's a war, what do you want? So he became a saint from his efforts. A lot of the Huron were very, many of them converted to the Catholic faith. So. Yeah, no, that's it's very interesting, a lot of fun, and I can help anybody who wants to, touch base with me. You'll share information with them,
Yeah.
and I don't have a problem if you put email in
Okay,
there.
perfect.
I don't know if people will. Everyone has a chance to use email, and if they want more, then I can try to help them out.
Yeah.
So
If you don't have access to email and you're kind of listening to this through a phone or whatever, feel free to give us a call at the library, ask for Amy, and I can help set you up with Dennis if you want to talk to him. Okay, but otherwise I don't see any other questions, so I think we'll wrap it up. But thank you so much, Dennis, for taking time out of your night to kind of share with us your passion here. And again, if anyone, I will send out an email, but in the meantime, if anyone has any questions, feel free to just email the library, and I can get you in touch with Dennis. Okay, perfect.
okay, thank you.
Well, good night, everyone.